Welcome to Now's Nonsense. So, like many of you, probably I've been keeping up to date on what is going on in the world, and I've been reading a lot and trying to educate myself a lot. Now, with all of this going on, NATO is in the news quite a bit, so I've been doing some research on it. So, NATO was established after World War II and that whole aftermath, and was signed in 1949. So, it first started off with 12 member nations and has since expanded to 30 member nations. Now, a lot of stuff that's going on in Ukraine has to do with Russia's worry that Ukraine will join NATO, actually. And so I've been doing a lot of research and reading about NATO, and I've come to find that there are 5 countries that I am really surprised are not in NATO. 5 European countries. And I'm surprised because basically of their geography, their culture, sort of Western European countries that I thought would be in NATO, but they're not. So I'm going to explain to you which countries they are and why they are not in NATO. So NATO includes the United States, Canada, and then a lot of European members. Here is the map of the European members of NATO. You will notice pretty glaring omissions of countries that are not included. So the countries that I'm surprised are not in NATO are Austria, Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, and Ireland. Now, each country has a different reason for not having joined this alliance, and I'm going to explain those to you now. Switzerland. Switzerland is probably the least surprising because it's pretty famous for its neutrality. It's been neutral since the Peace of Westphalia since 1640. They remained famously neutral in World War II, and so their neutrality is pretty well known, so that's the least surprising one. Austria. This one's a bit surprising to me because it's pretty, similar culturally to some Western European countries like Germany, for example, but it's not NATO. After World War II, Austria was occupied by Allied forces until 1955. Then in 1955, the Soviet Union had the Moscow Memorandum, which demanded that Austria remain neutral, sort of in the same style and model as Switzerland's neutrality. So since 1955, Austria has been legally bound to neutrality. Sweden. So Sweden bases its neutrality more on tradition than any sort of international treaty. Swedish neutrality was formally proclaimed by King Gustav in 1834. So Sweden is kind of an interesting case because in 1941 it actually allowed Nazi forces to go through their land to get to the Finnish front, but at the same time they protected refugees from Nazism. After World War II, Sweden opted to preserve its neutral status. Similar to Austria, Finland's neutrality comes from the period directly after World War II. This neutrality was first recognized between Finland and the Soviet Union in 1948 with the Treaty of Friendship and the Cooperation and Mutual Assistance. Basically, this promised the Soviet Union that Finland's land would not be used for an attack on the Soviet Union. So Finland's basically an enforced neutrality from the Soviet Union, similar to Austria. To me, the most interesting one is actually Ireland. So Ireland refused to join NATO because they did not want to be in an alliance with Great Britain, and joining NATO would force them to officially recognize Northern Ireland as a part of Great Britain. Now, I made a previous video about the Irish, Northern Irish, Great Britain conflict there, so you can watch that if you want a little more background on there, but that is the original reason why Ireland refused to join NATO. Ireland said as a condition for them joining, Great Britain would have to recognize the unity of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which was unacceptable for Great Britain. Therefore, Ireland has not joined NATO. So guys, those are 5 pretty prominent European countries that I was pretty surprised to find out are not in NATO. Thank you for listening to my nonsense.